Hello, everybody. Today's guest is Alex Egeler. He's a career coach for parents and a father of four. In this episode, expect to learn how to give yourself permission to change careers, what to do when you don't know what to do next in your career, how to strike the balance between being with your family and pursuing your career, and much more. My name's Anthony Franzese. You're listening to the Successful Working Parents podcast, where we talk to working parents about how they're able to balance it all and still thrive. If you enjoy the episode, please subscribe. Anyway, on to the show. Welcome back to the Successful Working Parents podcast, the podcast where we talk to successful working parents. My guest today, he is a career coach for parents and a father of four. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Egeler. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you today. Usually we start off with a little background on your career, if you'd share that.
Sure. So I started as an aerospace engineer. I thought that was the job that I was going to have for basically my whole career. And I did that until about 3 years ago when I sort of became a stay-at-home dad, not by choice, but my company went out of business during the pandemic and we needed a parent who could kind of stay home and take care of the situation. And at that point, I realized that what I loved about my career was working with the people and helping them and mentoring them. And I didn't actually really enjoy the aerospace engineering part of it at all. So I left that behind and became an emotional intelligence and career coach, basically.
And you have four kids, right?
I have four kids, yeah, all four boys, an almost 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and then twin 5-year-olds.
Wow. So did you have all four kids when you first had this career transition?
Yeah, and that was a big part of it. So the twins were born October of 2019. So just they were 5 months old when the pandemic started. They had been home with a nanny for 2 years at that point, and we knew that we really needed to get them out into the world, and we were going to put them in daycare, but with COVID protocols and knowing how sick they were going to get, we just knew that having two working parents with, 50 plus hour a week jobs was never going to work out. And it basically came true. I mean, in the first probably 6 months of them at daycare, I think I counted that there were 37 days, working days, that I had to, at least do some sort of parenting or taking care of a sick kid. And there's no way I was going to be able to start a new job and kind of keep up that pace. So
Yeah. So when did you decide to focus specifically on helping parents find a new career or find a fulfilling career?
yeah, so that came about probably about a year ago or so. I had been doing sort of general coaching. I'd been doing some parenting coaching, some emotional intelligence coaching, and I had a friend of mine who came to me and said, "You know that feeling you had when you first went back to work after your oldest son, and you really didn't feel like your job made any sense anymore?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay, well, I feel exactly that way right now. And so can you tell me what you did?" And so the background story is that my first son I had when I worked at a big aerospace corporation. I thought it was a perfect job to have as a working parent because it had really firm boundaries. Like you couldn't even take computers home. It was, workday was done at 3:30 and that was it. Then I could go home. And I went on leave. I was gone for about 11 weeks taking care of my son from when he was about 3 months to almost 6 months old. And I went back to work and nobody had done any of my work. They had just piled more on.
Mm.
And in that time, I had seen my son grow, from basically like lying on the floor at 3 months to like sitting up and rolling over and interacting. And
Yeah.
nothing had happened at work. And I was kind of, I don't know, disillusioned by it. Like,
Yeah.
really, this is how I'm going to spend my time? So I did, something that was extremely out of character. I left, this big sort of corporate job to go work at a tiny aerospace startup with a 6-month-old. And it was more work, but it was also much more fulfilling and it meant a lot more. I could see the impact my work was having. And that became like the most important factor for me all of a sudden. So, that kind of was the first of a series of job transitions where I realized that the things that I thought would be helpful for working parents were really, I had it all backwards, or it was exactly the opposite of what I thought in a lot of cases. And so my friend said, I feel exactly the same way. And I said, oh, that's interesting. She said, well, what would you have done, now a decade later to help yourself? And so I kind of worked with her through that. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder if other people are having that sort of same feeling around what I thought I wanted to do with my career has really changed now that I have kids. And it has. That was
Yeah.
when I started talking about that, there were a lot of people who it really resonated with.
Awesome. Okay, so let's say I am one of those parents who's maybe in a career transition, or maybe my current career just doesn't give me the flexibility I need, and I come to you for help. What are some of the things that you would ask me? What are some of the things that you would do to help?
Yeah, so I think the people that I really, target and kind of work best with are ones who are having that feeling like the career trajectory they've been on and have been leading up to that point isn't exactly where they want to go next, but they don't really know what they want to do about that. And so there's kind of a few steps. Basically, the three pieces of it that I realized were really important to my journey were around figuring out where I sort of wanted to spend my time and energy. And it became a bigger factor around A, having an impact at that job, but also B, it being something that meant a lot to me, that I thought had more value to the world than just sort of collecting a paycheck. So I do an exercise called Ikigai, where you sort of focus on what are the different elements that you're good at, that you enjoy doing, but also that sort of matter to you and your values, and how can you convert that into a job or something that you would get paid for. The second piece is around kind of how you use your energy. So one of the key things that I learned at one point, I'd always said I didn't want to be a manager. I didn't want to get promoted because I didn't want to deal with the stress. I thought that wouldn't kind of do well for me because I'm a very anxious person. And at one point, when I was working for the startup, there was an opportunity to get a promotion, and I decided to go for it. Um, and when I got promoted, it was again one of those moments where kind of this rule that I'd made for myself was the opposite of what I needed to do. And the reason was I was much better suited to help people and support them in their work and kind of coach them around how to work with other people and things like that than I was to actually do aerospace engineering. I really
Yeah.
enjoyed writing computer programs to design airplanes, but I was actually much better at the sort of personal interactions around it.
Hmm.
And that was actually a lot easier for me too. So the days were more stressful, but they got easier. I spent less energy doing it. And as a result, I kind of enjoyed it more, and it made, sort of my whole life easier. It was actually like a weight kind of lifted off. So I found an emotional intelligence assessment called EQI, where it basically helps you understand what are the things that you're good at and are easy for you to do. And then take that and then focus that into how can you turn that into sort of a day-to-day job? What elements of a job would be, you know, energizing for you, things that you like, but things that also maybe don't really drain you very much, so that you do have that energy to be a parent. And the third piece is around kind of identity, which is how do I give myself permission to go find that new job, which again was a big one for me.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting one. Let's talk about that one first. So, I think that people feel a lot of feelings, right? You might feel stuck, or you might feel like you have to do what you're doing. You've built up this career in this one place, or you have to provide in a certain way. So, how do you help people kind of more with like more of that mental roadblock before we get into some of the practical, technical stuff?
Yeah. So I basically work through kind of what work means to you and what family means to you, and dig into sort of those two elements and where they really came from in sort of your growing up, your formative years, in the years where you were sort of picking what are you going to study, how are you going to focus your career, who were the influences and what were the things you saw. And again, so for me, this one really kicked in when my company went out of business. I'd actually been promoted. I was an executive. I reported to the CEO. I had all of these contacts in aerospace, and they were like, you just tell us where you want to go work. We'll get you an amazing job. No problem. You've done great here. We can help you find a new spot. And I said, actually, I'm just going to go take care of my kids. And I felt terrible. I felt like I was sort of abandoning all of the people who'd worked so hard to help me get there. I felt like I was letting my family down because I was, not making any money, and that's what I was supposed to do as the man. There were a lot of mental blocks, and a lot of it really came from the influences of my dad and my granddad. So they were both very successful. My grandfather went from like working in the mailroom to like almost CEO of Exxon. I like literally like the American dream, first of the family to go to college, had set us all up for success. My dad started his own company. It was very successful. Then when it started going downhill, he also actually really struggled with depression and ended up taking his own life. So I had these two like major influences of business success is everything, because it was so important to my grandfather. And it also coincided with this really terrible thing that happened to my dad when his business wasn't successful. And for me to be in this, okay, well, I'm just going to be a dad, was kind of giving up on that legacy. And I'll never forget, my wife had a moment where she said, they're both dead. And I understand that they were both big influences on you, but it's really up to you to tell the story however you want. And you can imagine that wherever they are, they're looking down and saying, boy, I can't believe Alex is, taking a break from his career to go look after his kids. We set him up for so much more than that. She said, or you can imagine that wherever they are high-fiving because you're the first one in the line who looked around and said, I don't need the career as much as I need to be there for my family. And that's the thing that they both wished that they would have done. She said, it's your choice. You can pick however you want to tell that story, but I think one of them will help you heal. And it was like, in that moment, I came to understand, oh yeah, this is their legacy, not mine. And I want to tell a different story. So I feel like my role in kind of coaching parents is to help them get to that point where they understand, what is my story and how do I want to tell it going forward? And really, what do we know now that will help me do that better than maybe, the story was given to me?
Yeah. Wow. Well, first of all, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sorry to hear that as well. And yeah, I can imagine what a toll that would have on any man, like in their career. Just the pressure to before you even really came to those realizations, the pressure to be successful is probably quite strong.
Yeah. In case actually, my grandfather sort of explicitly told me that over and over again of, your job is not to screw this up. That was, he literally said that over and over again to me. And
Yeah.
then this was this moment where I was sort of like, well, this is what he was talking about. This is me screwing it up. And then
Yeah.
to sort of flip around and say, no, he didn't understand, right? He was the one who was screwing it up. He traveled the world. And he had so many regrets after my father passed away of all the time that he spent on his career that he missed out. And I saw it. I mean, I was literally his last living relative, so he poured it all into me, and I got to see as much of it as anybody. And
Hmm.
it was really heartbreaking sometimes. And so to say, that's not the story we're going to tell here, right? That's not how
Yeah.
this is going to go for us.
So did you notice that shift in him towards the end? Like, did he kind of give you a different vibe of as far as what's more important?
Yeah, definitely. He came to realize how important that sort of family connection was. And I think he had nothing left. There was nowhere else for it to go but me. And so he really sort of hung a lot on that relationship in a new way. The last sort of 10 years of his life after my father had passed away.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are or do you see any common career paths that the working parents that you work with head into? Like, did they all, after you work with them and after you do some of these exercises, do they often come to a few similar conclusions as to what they might want to do next?
In a lot of cases, it's really more about, it really is letting go of that identity piece and getting away from the idea of what I should do, and then getting to what makes sense. And so some cases it is, a step back. In some cases, it's more of just a step sideways into a new direction and feeling kind of confident and brave enough to do that. And I think a lot of the societal conditioning is around, providing for your family and making sure you can make money. And one of the things I talk with my clients a lot about is the idea that when you're comparing jobs or careers or ideas, the salary is such an easy metric to compare, but the flexibility and freedom and feeling that the job gives you, there's no number associated with that. And so a lot of people really get hung up on, how do I compare this, these raw numbers with these sort of smushy feelings and do the right thing. And so it's really about, again, kind of getting that permission to say, this is the thing that I really loved about my career when I started, and I just want to go back and do that. And I may have been promoted and have all these opportunities, but that's not what makes me happy,
Yeah.
things like that. So I'd say it's mostly just about letting go of the shoulds, right? What should I do? What's expected of me? And then how do you sort through that to, but what would really make me happy? And can I make that work financially for my family?
Yeah, it's funny you're saying this because I work in sales and I have what you call like an individual contributor role where I carry a quota and I don't have anybody under me. And there's always been this pull to like kind of go through the management track just because of societal pressure of like to always be like aspiring to more and climbing the ladder. But I know deep down that I'm going to be in meetings all day. I'm not going to have the same flexibility and autonomy that my current role as an individual contributor offers me. And so I've been, especially now that I'm a parent, I've really been fighting that urge to want more and want to be more successful and just high, even if it's not more, it's just a better title, right? Fighting all of that compared to holding on to like some of these squishy feelings that you're mentioning of like being able to take my daughter to daycare and pick her up and take a break in the middle of the day when I need to, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that it is really, it is about digging into, where does that influence come from specifically, in my life, right? Who painted that picture? Who modeled those things that made me want to go after those? And then, you know, were they happy? Did that work out for them, right? Just because that's what I saw, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what I should do, or even what they would want me to do. So it's a lot of unpacking, again, sort of where those influences came from, and what do they mean to you, and how do you understand how they fit in your life today, kind of like you talked about with your role.
But it sounds like you're not necessarily having a lot of your clients come to a similar conclusion of like, oh, I should go like be a teacher or something. They're not all of I really coming to the same conclusions.
No, it's very individualized. I mean, it's kind of, it's more about each person unpacking what that next step in the path means. And in some cases, it is, I really do want to take a step forward. I want to, become a manager, or become, higher up in the system. And how do I do that in a way that still serves my family as well? And I think, I advocate and help parents find flexible jobs. There are also, that doesn't mean that I think that you have to have one, right? I mean, there are certainly people who make any system work, and I think anyone can do what they need to for their family. It's really just about making sure that you're making a choice. I want to help the people who want flexibility but don't know how to get it. If you want to work 80 hours a week, you don't really need my help. Like, most
Right.
jobs will just take that, right?
Yeah,
You don't need
sure.
to
Yeah.
find something special for that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I want to stress that it really is about, just, I want people to be deliberate about that choice and make what they think works for their family. And I don't advocate that there's one right way. Any family and the dynamics are what they are and what they need to be at that moment, and they will certainly change over time.
Yeah. So is there any reason or like a main theme of why parents come to you in the first place? Are they usually in a similar situation, or what's kind of the pain that they're looking to solve in the first place?
In a lot of cases, it is, kind of what you talked about, the recognition that they've had this pressure pushing them forward, and maybe that has pushed them someplace that they didn't really want to be, or that isn't working for them anymore, right? I think one of the big revelations I had when I went from, just working to now I have working and I have kids, was kind of that comparison, right? And I think about sort of three comparisons. I had the comparison of me with the other people around me who didn't have kids, right? And think like, oh, they're working so much harder, they can get so much more done. I had the comparison of myself with who I used to be, right? Which is the like, I used to be able to get all this done, and now I have to leave at 4 o'clock to go pick up my kids, and sort of like judging myself around it. And then the most dangerous one actually is myself with other parents who seem like other working parents who seemed like me. And that was really the one where, well, they have kids, but they work, late and they do all this. Well, maybe they have a nanny because that's what works for them. Maybe they have grandparents that live down the street and can pick up their kids every day. And especially, so my oldest son, he started struggling a lot during the pandemic with mental health and started having bigger and bigger sort of depressive episodes and things like that. And I came to understand that, there were people really close in my life who knew what was going on, but a lot of people on the outside looking in didn't. But it was a huge impact on how we spent our days. So that comparison against other working parents can be a really dangerous one too, because their situation can be so drastically different from yours, but just sort of in the cursory top view, it might look the same. I think that, to answer your question, the reason parents come to me is usually because somewhere in those comparisons, they are getting stuck, right? They're either comparing themselves against who they used to be, against the other employees who don't have kids,
Yeah.
or even the ones who do, and saying, there's something wrong, there's something I should be doing better, something like that. And that's usually kind of the trigger of, I need to make a change, I need to fix something.
What do you think is something that parents can do, or like something that they should be looking for in a job to give them some of this flexibility that we're talking about?
So, for me, like I said, I left the sort of big cushy corporation. I went to this small aerospace startup in Silicon Valley. It on paper sounds like the worst shift you could make for kind of a working parent. But the job that I went to, the person I worked for had two kids that were just a little bit older than mine. The team consisted of 12 guys, because we're aerospace engineers. Unfortunately, that's how that works. And of that team, it was like 9 of us had kids under 5 years old. And so this idea of, oh, I need to go pick up my kids. Oh, I'm homesick. I got to work from home. All of that flexibility, like everybody just got it. It didn't really, we didn't have a choice, right? And we all were going through it at the same time.
Yeah.
I think the main thing to look for is, do the people around you understand your situation, either because they've been in it recently or they are able to be compassionate of it. And it's really, if you are the only working parent in a group in a very high stress, banking job, like it's going to be tough, right? But if you go into the group and you get the sense that the hiring manager says, "Oh, I've got to run. I've got to go pick up my kids to take them to, ballet or soccer." Things like that are real clues of, okay, this is a workplace where life is understood and we can kind of do it. And helping ask questions around, how do you say that in a way that, won't be off-putting to somebody who's, hiring, right? That's, whether you bring that up in an interview and how to do that sort of tactfully.
Do you feel like there's any industries or roles that are more friendly than others, or family friendly than others, or is it kind of like you're saying, it's more about the culture within that industry or role?
So most of my experience is around sort of tech and engineering. That's kind of a big focus. And in particular, it really is very company specific. As an industry, I would say there are places that really get it. And there are places that talk about getting it and don't get it. And then there are places that really do. And in a lot of cases, it's, the corporate culture is a piece of it, and certainly having policies around, working from home and flexibility like that matter. But really the biggest factor is almost always the direct manager that you'll work for. And that, there are people who work for companies that are, talked about for their amazing flexibility, and they have terrible experiences because their direct manager doesn't, really has no doesn't draw on that or doesn't fit into that culture. So it really is, the company is a start, but I think you can find, it's really about finding sort of the tribe of people who you feel get you and are going to be able to work with. And it's not necessarily that they're all working parents. It could just be people who they have their own caregiving because they're taking care of their parents, or, whatever it is. But just the people with that mindset of, I love my job, I want to work hard, but I have a life outside of it. And surrounding yourself with people like that. And then, most of the problems take care of themselves from there.
What do you say to somebody who's like a teacher or a construction worker, and they say, I don't have that flexibility. I have to be somewhere every day.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, there are a lot of there's a lot of talk now about how can you sort of find new careers and things that you can do, through online and stuff like that. And I know a lot of teachers have left the industry to go for specifically that reason, either gone to sort of remote roles. I've talked to actually numbers of them who were former teachers that went to find remote roles in other industries, that some of those same sort of skills of I can work with people, I can talk to them, I can help instruct them, customer service and things like that. But it is really, there is a big divide around sort of the jobs where people have to be there on site versus the jobs that can be done remotely, and making it a lot harder for those folks who really kind of are, remote isn't really an option.
Yeah. So sometimes it's a matter of you have to change careers then, right?
Yeah, I mean, and figure out, is there a way that I can transfer the skills that I have, and is are things important enough in my life that I really need to do that?
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to hear a little bit more about your own experiences as a working parent. You have 4 kids. That alone comes with all kinds of things, and you lay your career on top of that. So, what are some of your thoughts on how to juggle all that?
I think, I mean, I'm really lucky. My wife and I are a good team, and her job is super important. She has to work really long hours, but it is relatively flexible in terms of the timing. Um, I would say the biggest factor that we faced was communication between us. And it got really stressful when, we both sort of had very high intensity jobs of, okay, someone's homesick, then we would get out our calendars and go through, okay, I can cover this time and then you cover this time, and we'll, they'll put them down for a nap here and we can both work. I think that one of the most important things that I learned was, just because I can power through those moments doesn't mean that I should. And, you know, when kids are sick and you're really stuck trying to figure out how to juggle, like, you may have things you absolutely have to do. But I think those are the times when you really need to figure out a way to give yourself the grace to say, just because I have an hour free here and it's a work day, but I've been parenting, I've been dealing with 2 sick kids all morning, like, that's okay to take a nap. That's okay to watch an hour of Netflix or take a shower. Like, that drive that I had of, I got to get everything done so that it's like, that was not helpful to the family, right? Because then the kids would wake up from the nap. I'd be rushing to deal with something from work and get it done. And then I'd be short with them and they're sick. And, I think the most important lesson that we learned is just, you have to try to give yourself the time to recover for you, and take care of you along with your work and your kids.
Well, that ties into something I often ask: is what do you suggest for self care?
Yeah. One of
Like,
the
how do you find that time?
Yeah, one of the things that I've found is very helpful for me, is basically at the end of the day, I will take a moment. I don't usually, sometimes I type it out or write it down. Most of the time, I just do it in my head, and try to think of one thing that I was proud of that I did at work, or one thing that I completed at work that day, one thing that I did that sort of built connection with my family, and then one thing that I did that was just for me, right? And so, for instance, from yesterday, I took the time to go exercise in the middle of the day and go for a walk. I went for a bike ride with my kids at the end of the school day, even though it was freezing cold and getting dark. And I, wrote a post that I was really proud of, and got somebody who reached out and said, "Oh, this post really resonated with me." And so on that, I'm like, okay, well, that was a good day, right? I checked all those three off. But then there's a lot of days where, one of those three is not there. And 80% of the time it's, I didn't do something for myself. And 15% of the time it's, I didn't do something with my family. And 5% of the time it's, I didn't do something for work. But whatever, if one of them, if I can't think of anything on the day for one of them, then it's okay. Tomorrow morning, first thing, that's the one I'm going to do, right? Like, make sure that I keep that balance by not letting any of them get too far out of whack. So that's kind of my sort of mental journaling of, how do I keep that balance?
Yeah, I like that. What about time management skills?
Yeah. Um, I'm the time manager for the family. It comes very naturally to me. I don't know if you've ever how old your kids are. My kids have a game called Overcooked. They play on the Switch, where it's
I
basically
used to play that
about
with my wife.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's about like how do you order everything and do it. And when my kids, I'd never played it before. I played it with my kids. They're like, "Dad, you're amazing at this." I was like, "What do you think I do all day, every day, guys?" um, so yeah, I'm pretty, I'd say lucky in that those skills come fairly naturally to me. But I think the most important piece around that I would say took a big parenting switch was to ask why the schedules were they the way they were. So I had this time when my oldest son, I would sit there and battle with him. Oh, you got to get your shoes on. Come on, we got to get out the door. We got to go do this. And then I was seeing a therapist about anxiety because I was recognizing that my anxiety levels were kind of getting worse and worse. And he said, "Well, have you tried just accepting that your son wants to do it on his own time?" And I was like, "But I'm the dad. Like, we're doing it on my time." He's like, "Right. But like, is it possible that maybe that's actually the thing he's responding to?" And I said, "Well, so what do I do?" And he said, "Well, if you say put on your shoes and he says no, you just say, okay, it's your choice. And that's it." And I was like, "What happens next?" And he's like, "I don't know, just wait and see." So I remember thinking this is crazy, right? Like my son is refusing to put on his shoes. Like literally that situation happened the next day. And I was like, "Fine, you don't have to put on your shoes." And he was like, "Really?" And I was like, "No, we'll do it on your time." And he goes, "Okay." And he puts on his shoes and we walked out the door.
Oh my god.
And I was kind of like, what happened here? And so I went back and I said, "It worked." And he said, "Yeah." He's like, "People don't like to be told what to do, and that includes kids." So he's like, part of your time management skills is like not building in more time to, force your kids to do things. It's building more time to let them do it their own way and just sit back and observe and allow that to happen. So I used to let my twins, I was like, we have to. I can put their clothes on them, and it'll take 30 seconds, and they might scream and they might be upset, but I can get it done, and we can get out the door. But instead, I let 20 minutes every morning for them to pick out their clothes and put them on and tell me all the stories they want to tell. And it took a long time of 20 minutes. And some days that 20 minutes only took two. And some days that 20 minutes took 40. But, I did my best to just be like, these are kids. They want to do it on their own time. There's no reason for me to put the stress and pressure of my life and schedule on them if I can avoid it, right? Between 6:40 and 7 in the morning, we don't really need to be doing anything. So let's just do this. And now, they're 5 and they go and they put on their clothes and they walk out the door. And it's not, we don't have battles about it. We don't have big fights. So I think the biggest thing that I'd say in time management that I learned was just accepting that they're people with their own opinions and skills and abilities and letting them develop that and not trying to make them into automatons or adults or super efficient robots, right? Just let them be kids and they'll figure it out. And over time, they'll get better at it and able to do it themselves. And then a lot of the time management problems kind of, dealing with kids anyway, start to go away.
Man, I love that one. I mean, I'm a huge planner and I'm a huge like time allotter, and I like to, back into things, as
Yeah.
from when it's time to leave to what we have to do before that, and this is going to be a big one for me because that's a huge one to keep in mind. Just because I can already see myself, right, like doing things quicker because I can do it quicker than my daughter can, and this and that. So that's a great one. All right, well, we're going to move into the final segment called Alex's Advice Corner. So I'm going to ask you for some advice on a few topics. All
Okay.
right, you ready? Okay.
Sure.
First question: what advice would you give to a working parent who feels stuck in their career?
Um, well, first, I would say it's perfectly normal for your career to feel different than it used to. And I think the advice I would give is really take stock of what are your values, what's important to you, and are you able to do those in this job, in the current role that you have, both your career goals and values and also your family goals and values. And it may be that your career is not aligned with your values, but it gives you the flexibility to do what you want with the rest of your life. And maybe that's okay, right? It doesn't all have to be perfect every moment. Parenting is all about seasons, and the seasons change sometimes faster than you can recognize. But if you aren't able to follow your values at work and you aren't able to follow, and it's impinging on your values at home as well, I would say that's really the moment where you should start thinking about, is this really how I want to spend my time, my energy, and kind of the message I want to show my kids?
What advice would you give to someone who is about to be a parent but still has a career that they want to focus on?
It's going to be different. And that's okay. And, that's really, I'd say, think about those comparisons and do your very best to wash away that comparison of yourself before kids and after kids. And especially in those first 6 months to a year, it is, there's no predicting what's going to happen. But I like to think of it as, I don't know how much, I don't know if you follow hockey, but like there are a lot of very successful defensemen in hockey who got better as they got older. And it wasn't because they were faster. It wasn't because they were stronger, right? It was actually just because they became more experienced and understood the game better. And so a lot of very experienced defensemen in hockey had their best seasons kind of like at year like 17, 18. But it was because they understood how to use what they had as opposed to the raw strength or talent that they had at the beginning of their career. I like to think about that, which is when you become a working parent, you really need to lean on the experience you have. It's not going to be about how many hours you can pour into it. And it's not going to be about, it's going to be much more about the efficiency, right? It's going to be about how quickly can I get the most important work done and then move back onto, okay, now I've got to go be a parent again. So I think really it's about focusing your priorities and taking all that knowledge. Don't try to do it the way you used to do it because you're not going to be able to. You're not going to have the time. You're not going to have the energy. Now you have to focus on what are the most important things I can do? What are the most impactful things I can do at work? And how do I get those done as fast as possible?
What is your biggest piece of advice for busy working parents?
For busy working parents, I think it's really about letting yourself take the shortcuts. And this was a big one my wife and I struggled with. There is so much parenting advice. You know what's right and what's the best for your kids. But sometimes you just have to let it go and go to McDonald's and get chicken McNuggets. And you know that that's not a long-term solution. But I think one of the things, one of the questions I got when I kind of had two kids, I said, well, you know, now you have two kids, like, is it any harder? And I said, well, no. I mean, we were already giving all the time and energy we had to one kid. We're just going to give it to two now, right? It's not like we have more time in the day. But what we've learned is we really just need to be more understanding of where are we spending our time and it's actually valuable and which things can we just let go of. And so, one of the most popular posts I've ever had on LinkedIn was about the crutches that we use, right? That we have mac and cheese 3 times a week and, that we have timers in the house to make sure that everybody is where they need to be. And all of these things that we do that sort of we know are not perfect long-term solutions, but they're what we need to get through the day, and that's okay. So I would say you really can choose how hard to make it on yourself. And if it's too hard, give yourself a break and take those shortcuts sometimes.
Mm, that's a good one. We were stuck in the car for 4 hours in traffic with my 17-month-old daughter
Oh,
a few days ago, and we did all kinds of stuff. And the last 20 minutes, we're like, let's just put Miss Rachel on. There's only a few miles left. Let's just get it on because we did everything else already. So I totally get that and appreciate you saying that. Okay, what's the best advice you've ever received?
I think, yeah, that was the story that I told actually about sort of acceptance, right? The idea that my kids are their own people, they have their own opinions, and the more that I can just accept that about them, the easier everything else becomes. And it is, from things like accepting that they want to tie their shoes the way they want to accepting that their sort of approach to how they fix problems is different than mine, and we were I'd say it was especially confusing for me because my oldest son is like a clone. Like the way he thinks and acts is so much like me. And when he does something, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I would have done there. And then our second kid was like nothing at all like me. And so I really kind of, that acceptance message was one that I was really working into to say, oh, he does things totally different. And we have a 5-year-old now who is just a wild man, and he is all exploration. Like he wants to understand how everything works. He breaks stuff all the time, but he also figures stuff out that like even that none of us ever knew, like he wanted to know everything in the house that would stick to magnets. So he just walked around and, he found all sorts of stuff. He was like, Dad, did you know this? And I was like, I didn't know that. And so, those types of moments of like, okay, like I don't want him to stick things in electrical sockets, but like, how can we find a way that's close to that, right? What can we
Yeah.
give him that he can explore around? And just accepting the kids for who they are. So, if I could say the best advice I have is accept that they are their own people with their own opinions and their own desires and their own plans as much as you can, as early as you can, every single moment. And the more you do that, the easier it all becomes, to just the connection builds itself automatically. They start feeling like they're more autonomous. They want to do more. And it just gets easier that way.
Love it. What advice would you give to your former self?
I think I'd probably say the take it easy, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I think the perfectionist in me was really struggled a lot in those first, 2 or 3 years of parenting of I know everything that I should be doing, and it's just so exhausting to try to do it all, and to think a little bit more critically about which pieces do we let go of, what really matters here, how can we do it better. My oldest son, he's almost 12, and he'll say, Dad, I can't believe you're letting the twins do this. You never would have let me do this. And I was like, yep, you're right. I never would have let you do that. Like, that's
Yeah,
absolutely true. And he's like, come on.
that's
But
right.
he
Yeah.
sees it. And I think it really does show kind of the evolution of just, I needed to let go more.
Yeah, totally. All right, last question. By the time this comes out, my daughter will probably be 17, 18 months old. So what advice do you have for me as the what advice do you have for me as the father of a 18-month-old?
18 months. Boy, I only barely remember that. So I think the next what's super fun about the next phase of kind of 17, 18 months and going into, is you really start to see their personality. And it gets especially fun when they get older and you can kind of connect it back. So I would say my advice is pay real close attention. You're going to have a lot of firsts and super interesting things. You're going to have a lot of lasts, right? Like things that you move out of and then you don't even realize that you sort of miss them. Um, and just pay really close attention to that because it'll be so interesting for you to see that evolution and think back to like I can remember my oldest son, things about him when he was one that like still to this day I can draw the line in connection. And I really am glad that I sort of noticed those things and could see those patterns. And it helps a lot too because those patterns, there's some things about him that really never changed. His desire for firm schedules and everything to be fixed, like that has always been true. And when we sort of understood that about him, it has made everything a lot easier. So I would say my advice would be pay close attention because this is a really fun time. It's hard. I mean, there's going to be so many challenges, but when you start to sort of become grateful and really notice those little quirks about her that make her who she is, and it'll be really fun to see how those develop as she kind of becomes more autonomous, more relatable and more interesting.
Mm, appreciate that, Alex. Well, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to connect with you, learn more about you, anything you'd like to share?
Find me on LinkedIn is usually the best place. My website is empathicegg.com. You can also go there. And I'm always happy to chat with working parents and hear about their stories and struggles and successes and things like that.
And how do you work with clients? Do you do hourly one-on-one? Do you have like a weekly program? Like, how do you normally work with people?
So I have a program actually that I'm just kind of putting the finishing touches on the first version of, but it's essentially actually an online course that pairs with group coaching. So you can do it at your own pace, all of the lessons and processes, but then when you get stuck, when you get to certain points, you have checkpoints where you come and then work directly with me for that. And the reason is that working parents, obviously, like the last thing I want to do is put more pressure on schedules and to put more, sort of time constraints or things that you have to show up for. So it's a model where you really kind of do it at your own pace. And then I am just kind of there guiding you along and working as you go.
Awesome. Well, I'll link to everything in the show notes. Alex Egeler, ladies and gentlemen. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony.